Good morning. You're all very welcome to Casa do Seguro at COP30 for network business connections to foster insurance during climate change. My name is Gabriel Pinheiro, and I thank you for being here today. Throughout all the days, we will have authorities from the government, leaderships from companies, besides representatives from international organizations. All sessions will have simultaneous interpretation. The headsets are found in the entrance of this auditorium. Grab yours before we start the activities here. The full agenda for Casa do Seguro COP30 is available at our website, casadoseguro.org.br, or you can scan the QR code that you see on the screen. The people that are empowering this event have concrete contributions for the ESG agenda. This morning, we will have the Allianz in our first round, talking about climate changes and how they impose new challenges for the city and the insurance market. We will turn urban spaces more resilient, and we will see how insurance can act in this process. I invite you all to watch the video of Allianz. We from Allianz work to protect all that matters to you so that you can live the best every day. We have a challenge of constructing our history in several years with resilience and having the client in the core for us. People is about believing in the transforming power that there is. We give support to important athletes and people who inspire other people around the globe. And we try to be part of the life of people. And we have the Allianz Arena here in Brazil. Allianz connects sport, culture, and entertainment. We try to cause a positive impact in the society. We have ABA. It's an association that supports more than 10,000 children and adolescents. The help is paramount from the partner sides. These are the people who support us. We are the number one insurance brand in the world with more than 125 million clients in 5 continents. We have insured these huge buildings. In Brazil, we have more than 50 branches with 1.8 million collaborators and providers, and also our brokers that build reliability relationships with more than 3 million clients of us. Thinking about each of these people, we developed all our services, and we want to protect your lives, your families, your most important assets. And also your business. For each action, there is one work to be done, and for each problem, a solution. Taking care of people is also taking care of the future of the planet. Here, we believe that growth, sustainability can and must walk together, and that we evolve when we are more diversified and inclusive. That's why we are here. It's our history and our major mission to take care of people. Allianz, you ready to live the best? Our first panel is entitled resilient cities, urban planning for an unpredictable climate. We will talk about climate changes that are directly impacting urban life with more intense extreme events. So we need urban adaptation. We will cover how cities can prepare to an unpredictable climate and what is the role of the insurance companies in this process, including the development of new climate insurance models, coverage and assistance for pricing and coverage of risks. So now we invite Mr. Edward Folk, CEO from Allianz Brazil. Lena Foldauer, Head for Resilience and Business Development of Allianz Risk Consulting. Mr. Fábio Morita, Executive Director of Auto Massificado and Vida from Allianz Brazil. Mr. David Paul White, Communication Director and Advocacy Director from CDRI. I want to remind you that this session is being streamed directly on our CN series at YouTube or by our webpage. We have simultaneous interpretation, and I hope you all enjoy this panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here, for watching us as well. My name is Edward Fork. I'm the CEO of Allianz Brazil, and I'm happy to be here. We are supporting the Casa dos Seguros, and we are empowering also. And Allianz was the first one to support the construction of this Casa dos Seguros because we believe that in our dialogue, in order to face climate challenges, is important because they are about and they are happening. And we have the opportunity to talk about finance protection, partnerships, public and private ones, so that we can adapt ourselves on this financial protection and also how to implement the sustainability agenda for the insurance market. I'd like to remind you that we were the first to support the Casa dos Seguros business, and it's a great honor to me to be here with you all. Today, we will talk about resilient cities and why we're going to talk about resilient cities. With urbanization and industrial revolution considered phenomena that contributed for the increase of temperature in the globe. And it's still growing significantly. And we have to remember that in 1860, two-thirds of the populations lived in rural area. And now 4 to 6 billion people live in urban areas. But here in Brazil, 87% of the people, 177 million people, live in huge cities. And in the last years, the cities grew a lot. And there was a decrease of on other places in the world. So we are talking about mega cities in Hong Kong and in China. There are cities that add 70 million people in a concentrated urban center. The city of São Paulo, if we add Campinas and the shore by Santos area, we are talking about 27 million people. So the state of Minas Gerais has only 21 million people. And why do we have to talk about cities? Because they have two elements that are paramount. The first one There is the permeability or impermeability of the soil, the emission of greenhouse effect gases because they heat the planet and they don't have green areas. Therefore, they contribute to the climate change. And on the other hand, they concentrate people, they concentrate wealth, and they concentrate the fact that this climate hazards will impact people. And therefore, there are large impact in individuals and in the surroundings. So cities are an important point in this panel. We also have to think about moving towards more sustainable cities, and the insurance sector has to take a different direction because we have to be seen as people that want to repair the damages, but also the ones who want to prevent the damages that can help cities to get adapted and then reconstruct or rebuild it when needed. And how are we supporting this movement with data and technology to understand where major risks are, amplifying coverages to cover this phenomena, and helping a mobility and a sustainable energetic transition that we do. We help the construction of more efficient cities, and we bring an assistance focused in sustainability. We also want to bring science and practical solutions to the market. Today, we have a panel about this subject. We have Lina Foldauer, who is the head of Resilience and Development, Fábio Morita, from Allianz Brazil, and our special guest, Mr. David White from CDRI. I hope that we can contribute to foster reflections on building more sustainable and prepared cities for this unpredictable climate. So, Lina, the floor is yours.
Amounts of rain with its engineered flood infrastructure. But when summer heat arrives, rails stop, offices, buildings overheat. We have built our cities for the climate of the past and not the climate of the future. And that gap between what we've built and what we need, that is where the majority of the population is finding themselves living. By 2050, 70% of humanity will live in urban areas. That is 2.5 billion more than today. But our cities are not designed for that many people, and they're already changing. Climate change is bringing more extreme wet and extreme dry periods. Warmer air can hold more moisture, so it draws more water from the ground, but it also releases more during intense downpours. Take, for example, Nairobi. The city had already struggled with droughts, failed crops, and dead livestock. And then extreme rainfalls happened, and it flooded streets, contaminated rivers, and spread diseases. But the climate aspect, the rainfall, is not the only reason for the catastrophic losses. It's also about exposure and about vulnerability. So about where we build and how we build. In Nairobi, the majority of the urban population lives in urban and informal settlements. So these are often already in highly hazard exposed areas. So faced with this, it's clear that we must make more informed decision about exposure, about vulnerability, but also not only consider historic data. So what floods looked like, what storms felt like. We're entering an era of what I think of as predictable unpredictability. So we know that change is coming. We can model some of it, but we don't know exactly when and how and what the cascading impacts will be. So that complexity means we need a different approach. We need to build our cities to evolve, to transform, and to adapt. There are some cities that have already mastered that complexity. One is Singapore. They severely invested in engineered, but also nature-based solutions. And through these investments, they managed to reduce flood-prone areas by from 3,000 hectares in the 70s to 30 today, whilst doubling the population. Rotterdam, they built a philosophy called room for the rivers. They use public squares that double up as retention bases during storms. Medellin, a city where the most marginalized communities were once cut off, both socially, but also physically. So the city invested in cable transit, they greened the urban hillsides, and they worked with the communities to invest in early warning systems and risk mitigation measures. What these cities show is three principles. The first one is that they use solutions that not only reduce risk, but also have social improvements, benefits for the local population. We know, for example, that urban parks help reduce stormwater by up to 90%. They can also reduce and cool streets by up to 5%, 5 degrees. But also they reduce air pollution, they create living spaces for the communities. Sorry. Second, these cities design for extremes, not averages. So where previously cities might have built flood retention areas for a 50-year flood, now they must consider a higher flood standard. So where risks rise, also our resilience standards must rise. And third, they integrate community expertise. We know from evidence that if we involve communities in adaptation measures, they are up to 3 times more beneficial compared to top-down approaches. So together with these various strategies, cities have managed to live with that predictable unpredictability. Another industry that has managed to deal with uncertainty is our industry, insurance. Let me take you back. In the 1990s, insurance was hit by catastrophic losses from Hurricane Andrew, and the industry was shaken. And they realized they can't only focus on the past anymore, but they need to anticipate the future. So that crisis sparked innovation. Insurance began developing catastrophe models that help us not only look at the past, but also integrate the future. Why is that important? Through these models, insurance has become more able to absorb extreme weather and catastrophes. So it is, as an industry, more adaptive, more resilient. That is important because we know that with insurance, communities are more protected. Studies show that when large natural catastrophes hit, economic losses afterwards can add up to 2 to 4% of GDP, but mainly in economies with low insurance coverage. In economies where most losses are covered, the long-term impact is almost zero. So we must increase insurance penetration, but we must also use our role as insurers to reduce risks across all components. And here the IPCC helps us. They define risk as being the product of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. When we think of climate change, the most important risk mitigation measure is always reducing our CO2 emissions. Investing in nature-based solutions can also help us reduce hazard severity. Insurers have an important role to play. They can invest directly in such nature-based solutions, but they can also insure such nature-based solutions to keep them viable in the face of, for example, extreme weather events. Second, exposure. Insurance here has an important role to work with the public sector to inform and steer development away from the most high-risk areas. Insurers can set prerequisites as part of their coverage to incentivize resilience. And insurers can support, for example, through advisory products on vulnerability. So what are physical measures that can be put into place to reduce risk? Overall, we're seeing a trend of insurers moving from being risk carriers to increasingly being resilience partners. Let me give you a few examples, including from Allianz. The first is the development of innovative products, coverages, and prerequisites. The industry is increasingly investing in parametric solutions, for example. So those are based on hazard triggers. In Syria recently, such parametric products provided relief to around 120,000 Syrian farmers and provided food assistance. Second, on resilience integration. Insurers are increasingly using Build Back Better endorsements to support clients to build back more resilient, more sustainable after a natural catastrophe. They're also incentivizing resilience. So for example, our colleagues at Allianz Fairs, after a flood event, clients who have adopted flood-proofing measures such as flood-proof doors would receive a reduction in their deductible by up to 50%. And third, insurers are increasingly playing a role in advising, in providing early warning and providing information. At Allianz, we have developed a number of tools to support our clients and homeowners. So Gloria stands for Global Risk Assessment Tool. And here, homeowners, anyone here can upload their home, their address, and understand what is the natural catastrophe risk that that particular building faces. Importantly, it also provides recommendations of what can be done to improve resilience. CARES, Climate Adaptation and Resilience Service. This is a means by which we can understand, especially for larger scale analysis, what is the impact of climate change on natural catastrophes? How much more extreme rainfall might one expect at a particular location? Such tools can be used by infrastructure operators, but also by municipalities to better plan and make our cities more resilient. We stand at an inflection point. The next few decades will determine whether our cities become epicenters of crisis or centers of prosperity. And the difference won't only be the climate, it will be the decisions that we make and the partnerships that we take. Insurance plays an important role. Insurance reduces the macroeconomic impact of disasters. But insurers can also help to make risks visible, to create incentives to advice. But insurance alone cannot build resilient cities. We need to work with academia to share evidence-based strategies to help us improve models. But importantly, we must also work with governments, with corporates, with architects to help us design resilient cities, set the enabling environment. Because an investment in resilience is not a cost. It is an investment into our shared future. Some cities have already invested in such a shared future. They use nature-based solutions with co-benefits for the population. They focus on extremes and they integrate the local community. They imagine and they have designed their own cities. And when the worst happens, they are protected by insurance. So we know that we must invest in resilience. We know that our climate is changing, and we must change too. But change, managed well, guided by the right values and with the right partnerships, isn't something that we should fear. It's something that we can design together. Obrigada.
Obrigado, Lena. Fabio,
Thank you.
ele vai falar sobre
Fabio is going to talk about these questions here in Brazil. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Lena. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here and represent Allianz and be part of COP30 to talk about this very important topic and what we can do about it. Okay, so the first thing, it is undeniable that climate change is here. It's more and more difficult to find people who will deny this theme because we can all see it. We see extreme events happening with a lot of frequency, more and more frequency, observing an increase of more than 200% in an increase in these events. And what we believe is that the insurance industry has a very important role. First of all, mitigation. I think we are the industry with the most influence power over our clients to adopt measures that will decrease the impact of carbon footprint in the future. And the second one, adaptation, how we can induce practices that will decrease the effects, climate effects when they happen. So this is also a guideline in Allianz as a whole. We don't want only to insure the risk. We want our clients also to be able to adapt so that we can minimize the risks. And if everything fails, we are there to offer the coverage as well. And one thing that is very important, when you want to combat your enemy, you have to know it very well. And it is not different in climate issues. The insurance is based on data for you to measure risk, and Allianz has a privileged position because we are in more than 70 countries. We have a history of more than 130 years of age. And so our database is really wide and global. And we reference the risks crossing the information that we have on different database. We have the power to know the risk very well and very precisely. And here in Brazil, we also help with that because we have more than 2,500,000 vehicles. So we also have a very big database here. And this viabilize having tools like Gloria, which is our tool for physical, for people, common people. And we get all this information and lead it to measure the risks. I'll just show a video showing how Gloria works, just for you to see that it is a global basis. Platform Flora is an innovative tool developed by Allianz to attend to risks or critical events based on data to evaluate the probability in many different regions. Check how easy it is to have information which is accurate. At Allianz, our commitment is to care for what is important for you. The interpreters apologize, but we are not getting the sound from the video. Okay, this is a tool that we are adapting at the moment, and it will be important to help in a global problem, which is the protection gap. 70% of the damages that are caused by the climate are not covered. For example, when we look at the south of Brazil tragedy that we had, it's even worse because the 100 million reais in losses which have been estimated, we could only insure 6 million. So we have a very big gap for protection. As we bring Gloria in, people have more understanding of the risk they are running. And of course, our clients need to be aware of the risk, but we also have to be there to ensure the risks mitigating the effects. But if we have also flood insurance, we used to have that, we already had that, sorry, for housing, for vehicles. So this is something that we are doing to protect our clients even more. And in company insurance, this is even more critical. We realize there is an increase of people accessing the coverage premium. Why? Because they are feeling much more the effects of the climate. So what do? We have an incentive for mitigation of carbon footprint. So all our heritage assets, they have solar panels. We believe that as an insurance company, we have to make it viable, that we should have sustainable practices. And we also have adaptation practices, for example, creating barriers, anti-flood, and we have consulting services to help our clients help their properties become more protected against climate events. Okay, now for vehicles, it's not different. We have been observing an increase in flooding affecting the vehicles. I have been working for many decades in this market, and in the past, floods were not so common. So unfortunately, this is not anymore a doubt that people have. People are certain that flooding will happen, but they just don't know when. So it has become a reality of our industry. And so we need to have more coverage to more clients. We realize that in climate events, the families don't have conditions to protect their goods. We see that with vehicles. We accept vehicles now up to 30 years old. There shouldn't be any risk that shouldn't be there shouldn't be any risks that wouldn't be insurable. We are trying to get all kinds of risks, if possible, whenever possible, to be insured. And in mitigation for the carbon footprint, it's important that in the same way that we do adopting solar panels, we should have a viabilization for new ways of mobility. For example, electric and hybrid cars, which is an important theme. 10% of the carbon footprint comes from transport. So we have to stimulate our clients to have this kind of vehicle. So you need to have insurance for those vehicles, which affects the ecosystem. When you offer an insurance to electric cars, you need also to have mechanic service available. And even our 24-hour assistance has to be adapted. In the past, we used to have problems with the car, which were called a dry pain. But at the moment, we have many more because we have electric cars. So you need to be prepared to be able to act on this kind of situation. Okay, then to wrap up, we believe that the insurance industry has this key role of inducing sustainability, of transforming what is risk into resilience, I think this is the challenge that we have when we are facing the new world, and this is our commitment to the future. Thank you. Thank you, Fabio. I would like to start talking to you to ask a question about to David. David, could you explain to us what is the coalition for the resilience infrastructure against accidents?
The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So just quickly on CDI, we're a coalition of 51 countries, including Brazil, and 10 international organizations with a specific focus on disaster resilient infrastructure. And I think the key message that I want to reinforce, that I want everyone to take away, is that resilient infrastructure is one of the smartest investments we can make. It protects lives, it safeguards economies, it unlocks growth, and when extreme events happen, it allows rapid recovery. Now, in terms of what we do at CDI, there are three broad things. The first is coming to events like this and making the case that this is one of the smartest investments we can make. So just to give a sort of a macro picture of where we are, CDI developed the first publicly accessible probabilistic risk model. Normally when I speak to people, nobody understands that. I think I probably have some more luck here. And that tells us that between 700 and 800 billion dollars a year for the world is the average annual loss to infrastructure from extreme events. That's roughly 14% of GDP at risk every single year. And we saw some of the initial reports after Hurricane Melissa a couple of weeks ago, is that some small island states have potentially lost between 30 and 40% of their GDP in just one event. So as the world, as a global community, we're carrying an unsustainable level of risk, and that risk is increasing. Now, at the same time, we have an opportunity. We know that by 2050, 70% of people will live in cities and urban areas, but we also know that 75% of the infrastructure that we will need by 2050 is yet to be built. So we have an opportunity to embed resilience rather than risk, starting right now. And the good news is, taking that opportunity pays for itself. It returns what we call a resilience dividend. So we know that adding resilience at project level can increase costs between 5 and 15%, but also that for every dollar we invest in resilience, over the asset's life cycle, it will return a dividend of between $7 and $12. So this is a smart investment. At the macroeconomic level, we know that by investing, we could halve GDP losses. So by 2050, we can make a huge difference. 80% of the impact of extreme events is on infrastructure. So by investing in infrastructure, including in resilient cities, we will make a huge difference. The second thing we do is by providing technical assistance, support to countries who are members and regions that are at risk, geographies, specific geographies such as small island states, mountains, cities that face very specific issues. Just to give three quick examples. In Orissa, so the CDI Secretariat is based in India. I live in Delhi. Orissa is a state on the Bay of Bengal, which has a history of facing cyclones, super cyclones. In the 1990s, there was a super cyclone that killed 10,000 people. After investments in resilience, early warning systems, super cyclones today are killing mostly. The focus today is resilient cities, and we're supporting technical assistance projects in Brazil, Bhutan, Honduras, India, and Sri Lanka. And in Sri Lanka, for example, we're supporting the city of Colombo, the capital, to enhance the resilience of their drinking water system to ensure that when extreme events happen, the population is still able to access clean drinking water. And the third thing we do, just very quickly, is by bringing people together, accepting that no one has all of the answers to the challenges we face. And indeed, lots of the places that we wouldn't necessarily assume would have the answers do, because of the fact that, as we saw, some of our older, more developed cities are actually adapted to the wrong climate. So, for example, last year we brought together experts from around the world who work on metro systems in cities to deal with specifically with the issue of extreme heat. Lots of old metro systems, including in London, where I'm from, are simply not adapted to even moderate heat, and it can become quite oppressive on the metro when there is. We brought together experts from cities with old metros, as well as cities like Delhi, where the metro is fantastic and it was built from the ground up to withstand earthquakes, flooding, and extreme heat, to share good practice. And we developed and released guidelines. So again, I'll stop there. But again, the key message I want to make is resilient infrastructure, resilient cities is one of the smartest investments we can make, and it pays for itself. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think fue una presentación muy.
It was a very interesting presentation, and it's linked to what Lena said about Sevilla, which was designed for the heat, and it's not prepared. So I would like you to talk a little bit more about how we can do this urban infrastructure to improve the resilience of cities. Lena.
Cities have always adapted to the climate that they've lived in. So the example I mentioned earlier on curved streets to reduce heat impacts, but also wind impacts. But there is great examples around the world of how societies, communities have built their urban infrastructure to adapt to their cities and to the climate of that cities. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from these cities in now those areas which are facing these hazards may be more frequent, more intense, and have not adapted to those. So a few examples also from here, Brazil, but also areas that have always lived in flood-prone areas, in delta areas. Here in the Amazonian, for example, traditional architecture often uses stilts, platforms that can rise and float with changing river levels. Those are practices that we can adopt, and I was very interested to see in Rotterdam, for example, they also built floating offices, so those that rise and float with changing sea level rises. For extreme heat, it's interesting to see that in many different cultures around the world that have always been exposed to very humid, very dry climates, they've all focused, for example, on using courtyards. And those have very tall walls that provide shade, but through the materials that they use, usually local materials, adobe materials, very thick materials, they take in the heat during the day and release it very slowly during the night. They also usually have plants within the courtyards, and through the evaporation and through the change in density creates this passive cooling. And we know that areas, often these more traditional historic areas of cities, are up to 10 degrees colder than modern areas. 10 degrees, if we think about how we feel in the summer heat and how we work at 35 degrees, that is huge. So to me, it's very much what can we learn from these various cities around the world that are already doing great work, working with academia, working with international organizations that bring that data together, share it, and we can then use that to also improve our role as insurers in that space.
Thank you, Lena. Eu gostaria. Lena falou muito, Morita, de.
Lena talked about the construction of the cities, but I think there is a very important point, which is how people move in the city. How do they go from one point to another? And if they really need to move from one place to another. And here we have a clear example. In Brasilia, you have districts where you can do practically everything. You don't need to move around. The sector can contribute with that. Do you think so? Yes, I think it is a tendency. You quoted Brasilia. You see some districts in São Paulo as well, where you live, work, study, everything near your home, which is one of the things that avoids gas emissions because of transport. And there is also the adoption of new modalities for transport. Now in São Paulo, when you have a home near the subway, you will see that many more people want to live there. They usually make bigger buildings closer to public transportation, understanding that there are fewer places for car, more structures for bicycles. So we as an insurance industry, we have to offer protection for that reality too. So for residences, for example, we offer insurance for electric bikes and bikes to induce our clients to adopt these sustainable measures. And another important thing is home office. Home office was learned during the pandemics, and this is now a reality. It's no longer just a tendency. And this is a great solution to also prevent people from moving around and decrease the impact of people moving around and producing gases. And we, as insurers, we have to try to find solutions for that. We observed that people, because people stayed at home, they use their computers much more and so on. And so we saw there was more electrical damage at home. So we offered coverage for notebooks, for appliances, even for dropping your notebook, all kinds of incidents that if you don't have your equipment at home, you can't work. So as an insurance industry, we have to be attentive to creating products which are adaptable to these new realities. Okay, I'd like to, David, I would like to understand, besides what we have talked about in the role of public agents and private sectors and the insurance companies, how can we as citizens contribute to the resilience of the places where we live, or individual people do? Mr. David, I'm sorry, I apologize. We cannot hear the original. I don't know if it flows for you. We're just waiting for it to be back. Interpreters waiting here.
These opportunities need to be created, but we're all busy. You know, we have families, work, hobbies, holidays, but we need to realize that this is important and engage where we can. And some examples are in a number of cities, they're now developing heat action plans with community, local level engagement. It's important that people do engage and then hold the local authorities for account for their implementation, for the investment that goes around it. Second is around participatory planning, ensuring that local plans are gender inclusive, that account for people with disabilities, people who perhaps can't avoid going out in the heat of the day and working, for example, ensuring that there's sufficient shade, that there's accessible water. And when there's an opportunity, supporting initiatives. So two projects that CDRI supported, one in India, which has developed an app for citizens to provide data on rainfall and river flows and flooding, which is helping both early warning systems for people, but is also building a data set with machine learning then being used to better predict future occurrence, and a similar app that's been developed in Bhutan around landslides. I think the second part of this is using the information that's available to us to make better decisions. And clearly the insurance industry with incentives has a role to play here. We heard about incentives around taking measures against floods if you're on a floodplain earlier. Initiatives like this really do help. And the third thing is, as voters in democracies, as consumers, making choices. holding our elected officials to account, not just at national and international level, but at local level, being deliberate consumers, buying things, insurance packages, cars, things that will help build resilience. Last one.
Thank you, David. Gostaria de voltar un poco a
Okay, I'd like
experiencia
to go back to the
en
experience
cómo
that we
analizar
have
las
had
ciudades
in
secas
how
y
to
ver
analyze that a
que la
city is
energía
resilient
capaz
and
de
how the
afrontar
city
estos
can
desafíos.
be
Me
able to
gustaría,
face
Lena,
climate
vos tuviste
change.
este año,
So,
en
Lena,
2020,
in
el premio Allianz
2020,
Climate Risk
you won the
Capital. ¿Qué
Islands
puedes ya
Climate
compartilhar con nosotros?
Prize.
¿Cuál fue
Could
tu
you
estudio
share with
que
us
levó para você ganhar esse prêmio e quais foram
your
as
research
principais
that led to
recomendações do
this
prêmio Allianz?
prize?
Yes, happy to. So in my research, I looked at developing and applying methodologies to better understand how does these impacts interact and influence the sustainable development of a country. So I worked in St. Lucia and we developed evidence-based modeling to understand climate risk impacts on infrastructure, but also on specific areas of the country. And what we found is that one particular area in the center of the country was both highly exposed to storm surges, to landslides, but it was also where already a large number of the forest population lived. So investments here in supporting these populations to adapt to climate change both have an effect in terms of reducing risk, but also in supporting development of that country. So we supported the government there to prioritize adaptation measures in these areas. Another example that our research showed was the one island in the northwest of the country. There was a wetland and it was considered to potentially take out that wetland to build a new construction facility. And the research showed the importance of that wetland and protecting that wetland because it helped to increase and retain the value of the surrounding building areas. So in terms of real estate, but also helped to protect the only road that connects the north and the south of the island from flash floods. So that type of evidence-based work helped to, one, the government in terms of prioritizing adaptation measures that they had already put forward as part of their national adaptation plan. But it also helped to inform where and how to invest or to conserve both the natural and the built environment.
Thank you. I think it was very interesting, how we can collaborate with the government.
Okay, you presented a video that I thought was very interesting, that it has to do with how insurance companies can help in repairing damage. The reality of all the risks in each moment. Can you tell a little bit more? Okay, and what kind of information people can get with regards to their address, for example, where they are?
Perfect. It's very easy to use. You put your address in your app and you go to maps. And that's what's powerful about this tool. It's global. And we have the example of Casa do Seguro here. Certain information are of public domain, such as topography and other data. And that gives a score to probabilities of risks such as floods, severe winds, and so far with that, actually, what is something that is difficult to calculate becomes better to forecast because for insurance, there is a gap because people don't think some catastrophe will happen. And its frequency, although they are becoming more frequent, for example, when there is a car crash, that's more often, and people can forecast that better. But as people understand the probabilities increase, they will acknowledge better. And there are some measures to mitigate or diminish those impacts. And for us and our partners and the brokers, we have the role to take, and we have the duty to take this tool to the public. And we will have to actually work a lot so that our clients will access the tool and have the perception of the risk. Oh, that's very interesting. You mentioned also something interesting, that is, the tool gives some tips for you to understand the risks of your address and what you can do in order to mitigate the risk and to have less impact towards you. And what we saw is that this is done for private addresses, but we will see throughout the day other tools for companies. And this is very interesting. I'd like to go back a little bit to David so that we can close the panel. You mentioned that the Coalition for Infrastructure, CDIR, one of CDRI, yes, one of the positive points is this, to bring information. So I'd like to actually give you 3 minutes for you to give a message for the insurers and how we can collaborate with the task that is very interesting.
Minutes. My key point remains the same, that collectively, whether it is the insurance sector, whether it's governments, whether it's the private sector, we need to take action now. We need to invest in resilient cities, in resilient infrastructure. It pays for itself. It's the smartest investment we could make. I suppose to be disruptive and throw the question back, perhaps, two of President Lula's ambitions that he stated months ago for this COP were the first to prove that international collaboration works. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges, a lot of skepticism. The second is to show examples of good practice, show that resilience works. So how can the insurance industry support President Lula's on these two areas?
Thank you. Bom, eu gostaria fechar aqui agradecendo
Well,
a
I'd
Lena,
like
Morita,
to
David.
close. Thank you, Lina, David, and Mr. Morita, for all that you shared and the opportunity you gave us to learn, and also emphasizing the role of insurers. The old cities were planned to a climate that is changing, and they have to get adapted. They have to adapt themselves, or we need to do something. And our consciousness on what we go and what we live on a daily basis, we have to start talking about the mitigation of these climate changes. And the insurer role is not only to fix or repair damages, it is actually to build more resilient cities. And as investors, insurers should enforce or give more power to the projects and to all that brings resilience towards the projects. And soon we will be back talking about climate changes for our sector. Thank you so much. Thank you for all that you shared on Resilient Cities panel. Today at 6 p.m., Allianz invite all of you for a cocktail. Come and stay with us. Moving forward, we will soon start the second morning panel.
E o próximo painel é
And the next panel is on climate changes and the new paradigm of insurance. It will explore how the insurance sector is innovating beyond the current models, specific coverages, data, and incentives that foster the continuity of business and the resilience of the main chains. The talk talking about natural disasters and the new challenges for the market, mainly in areas such as agribusiness and infrastructure. I invite to stage to come and to be with Edward, Gabriele Durish, CSO of Allianz Commercial. Let's give her a round of applause. Also, I invite Mauricio Masferrer. He is the Executive Director of Corporate for Allianz Brazil. Butch Bacani, the insurance head of the United Nations Environment Program. Once again, I'd like to remind all that this panel is being streamed live from CNseg channel at YouTube or on Casa do Seguro's website. Enjoy the panel. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For me, it's a great honor to be here at the Casa do Seguro, not only as to empower, but also to say that Allianz was the first insurer that supported Casa do Seguro, and together with Gustavo and Diogo, put this participation together, and that's why we're here today. And we had a previous panel that was very interesting, and it's very important to do such connections with leaders, executives, and other organizations from the civil society. And our objective today is to contribute on the sustainable agenda. What we've learned in the last years is that the climate events, the extreme ones, are not exception. As Mr. Morita said some minutes ago, he mentioned the floods in the vehicle sector and automobile sector, actually. And globally, we know that natural disasters increased 5 times in the last 50 years. And in Brazil, based on the common sense, we thought that Brazil was a country that was less exposed, far from the climate catastrophes. But nature is giving signals. It is giving signals such as in 2011, with intense rains in Rio de Janeiro with 900 victims, and then in Petrópolis, a city near Rio, also in São Sebastião, in the state of São Paulo, and then we had a tragedy in the south of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul. So we cannot forget the floods. We also have Pantanal in 2024 that suffered the worst drought ever. So we have floods on the one side and drought on the other side. So we are more exposed. And what is interesting is that Allianz has a risk barometer, and in Brazil, the climate changes were pointed as the second concern from the side of Brazilian entrepreneurs. The first one he mentioned, but it's in our agenda that climate changes and the impact of it is very important for Brazil. In the panel today, what is the new paradigm and how will the sector face these climate changes right now? And the future is to understand that it's going to be more difficult and less forecastable. And we have to have technologies to understand the changes. And the sector is an asset, is the main actor, maybe, because we are talking about also the changes of the society and the historic adaptation of the sector, and we have to keep moving that way. And besides the change on bringing a better knowledge of the risk, mapping what is needed and offering coverage, this is part of the technical transformation, but there is also an ethical transformation, a transformation where the criteria for sustainability must be part of the business management and succession for the insurers, and how at Allianz we incorporate that with excellence for client service, with support and flexibility when critical situations happen, and focusing on sustainability. And these are our challenges, and we will talk about them today. And to talk about these subjects, we have people who represent the commitment with this transformational agenda. First of all, Gabriel Durish, CSO of Allianz Commercial, my friend, Mr. Mauricio Masferrer, Executive Director of Corporate Business for Allianz, and our special guest, Butch Buchanan, Head of Seguros, Head of Insurance of the United Nations Environment Program. You're all very welcome. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eduard. I'm going to stand over here. So first of all, just to introduce myself again, I'm Gabrielle Durish. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Allianz Commercial. My role is a global role overseeing how we implement Allianz's group strategy around sustainability, climate risk, and climate resilience across the group for our commercial, which is our corporate business. And I just want to say it's great to be here. Brazil is an amazing country. It's my first time here, and the hospitality and just the energy of the people that I've met has been amazing. So I'm going to talk more about the global impact, the way that we're reacting on a global level to climate change, and the way it's impacting insurance and the types of products and solutions that we're creating or adapting or innovating. And then I'll hand over to Mauricio, who's going to talk in Portuguese about more of a local impact. So where do we start? How do we understand climate risk and how do we feel it within our organizations? Eduard mentioned the Allianz Risk Barometer. So this is a survey that Allianz run every year where we ask our customers and internal experts about the risks that they're facing so that we can gauge which ones are becoming more important and coming up or down on their radar. So that's what the Allianz Risk Barometer does. And here you can see the development of certain risks over the past 9 years. You can see that some dramatically decreased and some increased. And we're going to deep dive into a couple of these in the next slide. But from here, what you can see is that climate change has significantly increased. That means our clients, the people in our organization, and other experts are feeling the impact, are concerned about the risk growing. And the question is, what can we do about this? Comparing this to other types of risk and also explaining the challenge around climate risk is sort of evident from extrapolating the risk barometer's results year by year over the past 10 years. So what you can see on this slide is there's a huge peak in the middle, the orange. That is pandemic risk. So when we were experiencing the pandemic, we were in the midst of it. We felt the risk. Our businesses were being impacted. Our family and friends were being impacted. That's when it felt the most severe across organizations as a risk that needed to be addressed. The challenge with climate risk is we're not feeling that acute impact yet, but it is growing. We experience increased Nat Cat events. We're increasing secondary perils. So I know that the Brazil, the market isn't exposed so much to the Nat Cat as we define it on a global level, But what we're also seeing is more flood events, more rain events, more secondary perils that aren't necessarily NatCat, but are increasing because of climate change. How do we prepare people for a risk that we know is coming, but they can't feel it in order to react as we did to the pandemic a few years ago? That's our role here in this room. It's what we need to do. We have the knowledge, we have the expertise within our organizations, within the departments, the government departments that we're working with, that we're talking to, and we have the connections with communities and with individuals to help them understand this growing risk and how it's going to be impacting their futures. But how big is the climate risk really from an insurance industry point of view? You'll see the slide, the chart on the right-hand side shows the economic losses and how they're growing. So economic losses associated with NatCat and how they've been growing substantially since the 1970s. And you see certain peaks where we've had years with very severe NatCat events. So is this because of climate change? Not directly linked to climate change. The challenge with economic losses is where we're building, where we're investing, where communities are growing, is areas that are more exposed to the impacts of climate change. So that when we have increased events and increased or more frequent events, they have a bigger impact because of the economic investment going into these areas. When there's an increase in one of these events, it's multiplying the impact that we're seeing from climate change. So that's the financial impact of climate change, and that will continue to grow. We will continue to see economic losses associated with increased weather events. On the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see something that represents regulatory changes. So globally, we see different areas adopting different types of regulatory requirements. There are different policies being put in place, everything a little bit slightly different. And what that means is the increasing stress on organizations and on corporations, especially global organizations that need to understand all the jurisdictions that they're operating in from this increased climate regulations. So that puts a stress from a D&O point of view if you're talking about insurance. So from a reporting requirement, what you're committing to externally, how you're talking about it, what your annual report says, and also the teams working within organizations, the amount of work that they need to do to keep up with these requirements. So that's more of a stress on the workforce, but also from a D&O and a liability point of view. So you have the physical loss, you have the liability or the D&O loss. What does this really mean? So what this means with the increasing risks, with increasing losses, the insurance protection gap is also increasing. And my colleagues spoke about it in the previous panel and previous session. This insurance protection gap is increasing because the insurance either isn't available in the way that it needs to be. So we need to rewrite the policies. We need to look at endorsements that will cover more complex types of claims, but also people aren't buying insurance. So in many areas that are significantly impacted by climate change, insurance even isn't considered. They don't have disposable income to spend on insurance solutions. So we need to look at the gaps that are increasing for our corporate clients, for the communities that we all live and operate in, and for individuals. And this chart, this could be sort of an overlapping Venn diagram because there are overlapping areas of insurance gaps that we need to start to address. So insurance gaps, I can understand. I work in the industry. We're working on solutions. We're looking at endorsements. What scares me or worries me or makes me a lot more emotional is this protection gap, the resilience gap. When you look at the chart on this slide, you can see the economic impact of NatCat events, which is the yellow columns, and about 60% of the economic impact is in developed countries. So these are our corporate clients losing money because of events, which is important. We need to cover this with risk transfer and also build resilience for them. But the more alarming fact, the more alarming information is that 90% of deaths from climate events happen in developing countries. So we have a moral obligation to improve resilience, as David and Lena and Marita were talking about, in order to ensure protection of lives, protection of assets, and that we're prepared for these events that are potentially going to get more severe. So when you put all of this together, you have an acceleration of climate change, you have an increasing protection gap, and that leads to economic instability at all levels: corporates, communities, individuals. So we need to work together. We need to make sure that governments are creating policies that can be implemented and that private funds are flowing in to these solutions that are being created. So we need to identify the risks, assess them, monitor, report it, and then treat it. And what does that mean from an insurance solution point of view? Oh, hopefully everyone heard me already. So what does that mean from an insurance solution point of view? So we're looking at transition solutions. How do we reduce emissions associated with our energy consumption? How do we transition to a low carbon economy? So looking at renewable energy, electric vehicles, battery storage. Then further mitigation measures. How can we further mitigate and reduce the emissions? So we're trying to mitigate the impact that we're having on accelerating climate change. And then the third area is resilience actions. So the important piece about protecting economies, protecting livelihoods. And what are we doing at Allianz? So we're looking at it through five different ways, really. There's 5 key approaches that we're doing from a solutions or a product or an involvement point of view. The first piece is low carbon solutions. So we're looking at renewable energy. And Mauricio will go into this a bit later on. The second thing is other sustainability solutions. So how can we incentivize our customers to be more sustainable? How can we incentivize them to build more resilient or to rebuild with lower emissions associated with the rebuild? We're looking at endorsements and also working directly with corporate customers on this. We know that we don't know everything. So we're also looking at partnerships. How can we create partnerships to offer services to our clients that we don't necessarily offer? But how do they know that they can trust third parties who are trying to sell them types of work? So we look at partnerships to introduce certain providers to our customers. The fourth area is advisory. So Lena was speaking earlier about climate advisory services that we're providing. How do we use our expertise to create products that can help our customers understand better? So providing advisory solutions around that. And the fifth area, which is more on the community side, is how do we build these public-private partnerships in order to support developments in different communities that we're not necessarily operating in at the moment. And there we have 2 sort of angles. One is around charitable donations. So how can we support from a charitable point of view? And the other one is around sort of skills, being involved in organizations where we provide input and knowledge and all the skills and expertise that we have within our organization from a non-profit point of view. So to summarize, we need to act with urgency. Everybody knows it. I assume if you're here, you know we need to act with urgency. We need workable, global, regional, and local mitigation policies. We need to be able to adapt and use these policies, so they need to be realistic. What is essential is policy alignment and financial mechanisms. Because if you don't have the financial backing behind a policy, you can't implement it. So that means that it's critical that we unlock private sector participation, because the financing comes from investments from organizations like Allianz into some of the solutions and the adaptation that we need. And what is undeniable is that we need to focus on resilience. We need to protect people, we need to protect communities, and we need to protect economies. Obrigada.
Obrigado, Gabriel.
Thank you, Gabriel. Now I'd like to invite Mauricio Masferrer so that he can give us an overview of Brazil and how we are at in this new paradigm. So the floor is yours, Mauricio. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here at COP30 in Casa dos Seguros, to be with Butch, Gabriel, and Edward, and have this audience that represents such an important sector of our economy. The insurance sector is paramount for the data capacity and financial capacity so that the community can navigate through crisis. And we understand that nowadays our task has never been so complex. It's very volatile. We have several risks. We are evolving in such fast speed never seen before. We have to think about social, political aspects, and climate change is one of the points we have to consider. And it's a risk that has evolved in silence because it grows grade by grade, and we feel even more. In the Gulf of Mexico, sequestration was 5 per year. In 6 months, which is the hurricane time, today there are 36. So the chances for you to have a problem in a trip or entertainment in that region is huge. How do the tourism sector sees that? 6 months where you will have an impact probably. Another visible impact are the droughts in South America. In the past, 1 per year, now 5 severe ones per year. And then we think about the energy matrix. In the past, it seemed to be a good business, but maybe it's not so resilient as before. Therefore, we see a silent evolution. And I have several other examples, crises during winter and other industries that are having to adapt themselves to this new environment. And in Brazil, it's no longer different. Everton has mentioned that we have suffered climate events. They are punctual. We had strong rains. We had a first hurricane in Santa Catarina. The first one was in 2004, and it's still strict to some sectors. Last year was an emblematic year. We saw several events, droughts, no rain, but in several different regions of the country. So in the past, what we watched on television is closer to us, such as last week. Last week, we had a strong wind in the south of the country. At 6 p.m. at night on Friday, we had alerts in our mobile phones. And on Saturday, how did people go to work? Concerned about strong wind. So we look to the infrastructure of Brazil. We have overhead network. And this is serious. And when we look to this scenario, what's the relevance of this scenario? How do we measure our participation if our mission is to help the society? We have to navigate on crisis periods. How are we doing that in terms of society? Very little. Protection gap usually is measured
clausulado que você tem na pólice quando o evento acontece, está em torno de 70% em países envolvidos. Mas em países em desenvolvimento, isso é...
in countries, developed countries, this is much higher. This is above 90%. Our relevance in climate change maybe is losing strength. When we look at that, what can we see? What would be our answer? We talked about that before. The question of change, of transfer of risk, where the market comes after a loss, our client, to help our clients and society, to an approach that helps society more and the communities to become resilient. I'll show you 3 examples of what Allianz Brazil is doing in these 3 years. Mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is how we help mitigate future impacts, and adapting, how we help societies to adapt to the future that we have ahead of us. The first example is agribusiness. Allianz is a very strong player in agribusinesses. And for us, it is an important industry. We have been working on 2 special and clear fronts. First of all, the transfer of risk. We have improved our capacity for agribusiness in 120% in the last 5 years. And this shows a clear commitment from Allianz with the Brazilian market, even in a moment where the risk is increasing a lot. And from SUSESP August data, we are the 2nd insurance company for agribusinesses in Brazil. And through a substitution with data, technology, satellite, we evaluate every area. We evaluate 15 ESG variables, out of which 11 are related to climate change. Any variable that is different from our beliefs in ESG, we refuse. So it's a clear commitment with the beliefs that we have in ESG, and they are much stronger than a business or a certain client. That the energy transition is no different. We have a strong participation globally and in Brazil, working in 2 big fronts. Having teams for risk engineering. They are new risks. They have new tech specs that you need to have experience, and you need people who understand to be able to structure a product which is adequate. Structuring of an adequate product will open ways for investors to be more at ease, knowing that that project has a technical support so that they can invest in that business. Allianz also helps with the adaptation. So we transfer risk, and we combine transfer of risk and investment to be able to help in this resilience scenario. And last but not least, CAS, which is a tool that we have developed together with our clients to help them be more proactive in their risk management. This is a tool which is similar to Gloria, but the client puts his data in his risk locality. We can evaluate 12 different scenarios of climate exposition in specific periods of time, 2030, 2050, 2080, so the client can understand what are the mitigation measures that have to be put into practice now for the business to continue going on. How can the business be impacted? And what are the measures for contingency in case we are impacted? And it helps with future investment. So if I want to set up a factory, for example, in a certain region, I can look and check if that place is adequate for me according to the climate conditions. Okay, finally, I would like to end up by saying that it's a moment of a lot of work, challenges, and uncertainties. But this comes with an immense opportunity of our market to position itself in a protagonist role, increase its relevance towards society. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mauricio, for your presentation. Thank you, Gabriela, as well. You have just shown what we can and should do in this new paradigm. I would like to start our talk here with a question to Babakani first. Thank you for having accepted the invitation in participating in this panel. And I would like to know from you, you lead the principles of the UN for sustainability in insurance. How is the collaboration among the United Nations and the insurance sector?
Thank you. Thank you to Allianz for the invitation. I think this is the first Allianz event that I've attended that's not hosted by Allianz in Munich. So it's a first for me. The other thing that I can say about Allianz, taking from my memory bank, is that we've at the UN we've worked with Allianz for about 2 decades now, and I've personally also known Allianz for another decade. So I've known Allianz since I was a baby, basically. What I can tell you for all of you here today was that when the first time we've engaged with Allianz, Allianz did not have a sustainability framework for its company. So whatever we're seeing today is a culture of sustainability that's been built over many years. And it pleases me to see, because when we were engaging with Allianz headquarters in Munich, we were telling them this cannot be a Munich discussion only. It has to go to all your entities across the globe. So when we see this progress, and as you're speaking as if we're talking to people in like Gabi,
Yeah.
it's great to see that culture has permeated Allianz entities across the globe. So to your question about how do we work, well, I think the starting point are the principles for sustainable insurance that we've worked on with the global insurance industry, including Allianz, from 2006, before it was launched in Rio in 2012. If you look at the principles for sustainable insurance, which has now been subscribed by over 300 organizations across the globe, the structure is simple. It's based on the spheres of influence of an insurance company. So the principles themselves are a guide for an insurer to embed resilience and sustainability into its core business. So principle one is, how do you embed sustainability into your strategy, into your underwriting, into your investment, into your claims management? Principle two is that if you're an insurer, how are you engaging with the rest of the value chain on sustainability issues? So if you're dealing with brokers or with reinsurers, that value chain has to be aligned on this agenda so that the impact will be stronger. Principle three says that even if the entire global insurance industry comes together and does all of these things, that's not going to be enough. It says we will work together with governments, regulators, and civil society to promote widespread action. And this is why we are here at COP30, because this cannot be an insurance solution only. And principle four is accountability and transparency. You need to be able to show what you're saying to all of your key stakeholders, whether it's your shareholders or your employees or your clients, that what you say is what you mean and what you're doing. And that builds a lot of trust with key stakeholders, including civil society. So that's one set, the principles as a global sustainability framework. But that has also led to Mutirao in a global context where different insurers, together with the UN and other stakeholders, have produced guidance to implement these principles. I can cite a few where Allianz, for example, has been a very key driver. In 2020, we produced the first ever global sustainability risk management guide, or ESG risk management guide, that Mauricio was talking about earlier, in the world for non-life business. That was co-led by Allianz and the UN. And it is still to this day, the global reference point for any insurer in writing non-life business on what are key sustainability issues and how you can have an internal process to systematically detect ESG risks in the underwriting process, all the way to your escalation process and all the way to how you govern that within a company. So that's one, and that was led by Allianz, but it involved many peers from across the globe, brokers, insurance association, input from civil society, and the UN as well. A few other things that we've done are working within the PSI, the Principles for Sustainable Insurance is something that I mentioned last Monday when we spoke here. We've partnered with finance ministries from the Global South on how we can help build resilient micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, because just like Brazil and most countries in the world, your economy is dominated by micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And if they are vulnerable to climate shocks, it will stunt and undo a lot of development that has happened over many decades. So the resilience agenda and the protection gap that Gabby and Mauricio were saying are absolutely important. And we're trying to do that in a more impactful way by working with governments across the globe. And then a few other things that I think are pushing the frontiers of sustainable insurance. And Gabby mentioned this. Through our work with insurers, we have also shaped the agenda and role of insurance in decarbonization. So what Gabby was talking about, transition insurance, as we move from a high carbon to a low carbon economy, how can insurers support their clients, particularly commercial clients, transition from high emissions intensive and high emitting business models to something that will support their transition to low carbon business models. So I think when we talk about decarbonization, it's very easy to talk about renewables or long duration energy storage or nature-based solutions. That's one end of the spectrum. And then obviously the other end is the most polluting forms of energy. But most of the economy actually are the ones that require transitioning. So you have cement, steel, agriculture, manufacturing, they all need to transition, and transition insurance is important to accompany clients towards that. The other thing, the other space that the PSI is pushing is the role of insurers in halting and reversing nature loss. So, or what we call nature positive insurance, and we have a working group on that, on how on a portfolio-wide basis, insurers can help reverse nature loss and also come up with innovative solutions to insure nature. Why is that important? Because nature is also part of risk reduction. So if you have healthy reefs, healthy mangroves, healthy forests, they all have flood or extreme heat reducing value. And that's important in terms of mitigating climate and disaster risk for underwriting portfolios. The other important element is that nature is also our carbon sink. So we are in the Amazon. The Amazon is a carbon sink. So the more we protect nature, the more we can also contain and address greenhouse gas emissions and how insurance can be part of the solution there as well. So these are just some of the examples on what we're doing globally with Allianz and many other insurers across the globe to move the needle, because this has to be a systemic change that has to happen. But it's really important to have leading organizations like Allianz behind this.
No. Thank you for your answer. It has been very clarifying, and thank you for your kind words to Allianz. And it's true that this global sustainability agenda has arrived to all the OEs of Allianz. And when the Insurance Association asked us if we want to collaborate with that, we were the first company in Brazil to say yes. We firmly believe that the market can do things. We firmly believe that Casa de Seguro is a good opportunity to put the insurance market on the floor, no, and to talk about all these issues. And thank you for coming here to express your views. So I would like to change slightly, no, because I know, Gabriela, that you are participant in a very interesting approach, no, that how to make insurance more available for people, no. Gabriela participates in the Human Insurance, que es una institución internacional con sede en el Reino Unido. O que procura esa institución es
So what is this institution doing? She's trying to reduce the protection gap and have an insurance with a different kind of approach. So, Gabriela, could you tell us a little bit about the role of the Humanity Insurance Institution?
Thank you very much. Yes, so I mentioned one of the on the slide where I showed the 5 approaches. The last point was around charities or working with leading organizations that are trying to close that protection gap. So Humanity Insured is a charity that was founded last year in June. And the idea behind the charity is it's been set up by the insurance industry to subsidize insurance products to communities that can't necessarily afford them in the first instance. And so from donations from a number of different organizations, including Allianz, this charity was created. And it was the brainchild of David Howden of Howden Broker, insurance broker, and he brought together leading people within the organization, within the industry, to encourage them to participate. And I'm on the board of trustees for the charity and representing Allianz, but also trying to maintain some independence as well between the decisions that the charity are making and the impact on the large carriers that have provided donation. But what the main purpose of the charity is to provide subsidized insurance cover to communities and areas of the world that are more or disproportionately impacted by climate change compared to how much they've contributed to it. And what does this mean in real words? This means communities such as smallholder farmers, migrant workers, and coastal communities. How do we work with them to help them understand the importance of insurance and to trust that insurance is a mechanism that can support, and it's not just money that they're paying that they won't see again. So what's important for Humanity Insured is that we work with organizations that are already existing in these communities. We provide the revenue to cover the insurance solution, and when there's a claim, we ensure that it's paid out and that the money goes to the right people. So when Lena mentioned the farmers in Syria earlier this year, they were impacted by a severe drought. Humanity Insured had subsidized part of the insurance, and that insurance paid out. And it wasn't a typical insurance product where it's a payout with a financial benefit. But in this case, it was through food and goods and things that the people that were impacted needed. And Humanity Insured continues to look for donors. They're working on the philanthropy angle to ensure that there's a constant stream of donations so that we can continue this work to advocate for the insurance industry and provide these solutions where they're needed the most. Another project that we've contributed to is for female workers in an Indian city that are impacted by extreme heat. So when there's an extreme heat event, women will typically stay at home to look after the elderly or the young, which means that they lose the income from the jobs that they go to, and they're paid on a day-to-day basis. And the product that we supported there covers that loss of income if they need to stay at home because of an extreme heat event. So there's just a couple of examples of the type of thing that we're working on. We're continuing to look for projects. I think Brazil is actually a key area where we can work with people, with communities who need a different type of thought around insurance. And we look forward to working and partnering with people in the country.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Eu gostaria, Maurício, preguntar o que o
Mauricio,
sector
I'd like to
pode
ask
fazer para
what the
conscientizar
sector can do to be able to make people aware of the need of the insurance and the need to understand the climate risk that they might be running in their homes, in their everyday life.
Acho que esse é
Okay, so
é o risco climático e
this climate risk and also maybe the insurance product, which is in debate here in Brazil. Let's look at different fronts. First of all, working with our partners, our brokers, to make clients more aware about the risk management and how insurance can add to their financial stability in case of a loss. The second point is work to create products which would be viable, economically viable to our clients. Because I see clients have an interest to purchase an insurance, but they don't necessarily have the budget to do so. And last but not least, as an industry, and we are very strong, we need to have an excellent customer service. The experience of insurance is the payment when there is a problem or when we have a toll service, tolling service. So this has to be, people have to see that this is a product that really works when they are going through a hard moment. Thank you very much, Mauricio. Thank you. I think we have a lot of work ahead of us to be able to reach all the population who actually needs to be able to purchase an insurance, analyze the risk that they are having. And for these micro and small-sized companies, they have to be insured as well. I would like to go back a little bit to the role of the sector. I know that in the first time it was asked, we have talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to reinforce why the United Nations and why Publican thinks that the insurance industry is one of the best to accelerate the process of climate transition. Why does the industry have this key role in this aspect, the insurance industry?
Sorry, I got entangled. So I think the answer is that for me, is that I haven't seen an industry with the three roles that I believe that the insurance industry possesses that could accelerate a sustainable transition and that will address climate change risks and opportunities. So let me explain. And I touched it briefly on last Monday. We think that the global insurance industry has three important roles in addressing not only climate change, but broader sustainability issues. But let's stick to climate change. And climate change has two components, greenhouse gases. So we need to reduce emissions. And even if we go to net zero tomorrow, we are already feeling the impacts of climate change. We need to make sure that we cope with the physical impacts of climate change. So we need to adapt. So the first role is the role of a risk manager. And this is what I think is potentially the most important role, because the key to better understanding, to better managing risk is to understand risk first. And once you are able to understand risk, you are able to quantify and prevent and reduce risk. This is why the insurance industry has learned a lot from major catastrophic events over the years, like Hurricane Andrew in Miami in 1992, which led to a catastrophe risk modeling industry that involves engineering, science, and insurance together. So through that lens of understanding risk, the insurance industry has been a champion of loss prevention and risk reduction, whether it's on seat belts for cars, on health and tobacco, or on flood reduction measures or disaster preparedness, there is a voice there in terms of incentivizing risk reduction. And no one wants losses to begin with. So if we can reduce risk, then we are also able to make sure that we have the risk transfer solutions that are affordable and accessible. So I think that's one. We haven't even touched on insurance yet. So the residual risk is where insurance comes into the picture. So obviously when disasters and disease happen, that's when insurance comes as a financial shock absorber. And then through the work of the UN with the insurance industry, we actually have expanded the role of insurance from simply like beyond a financial shock absorber to actually an enabler. Just like credit, just like loans, just like investment. By having insurance, you enable economic activities that can support your transition. So the clean technologies that we need, nature-based solutions, resilient infrastructure, they all need insurance as a prerequisite for finance, like banking and investment, lending and investment to flow there. And the third role is the role of institutional investors. Globally, the insurance industry has over 40 trillion in assets under management. Allianz itself is a big company in terms of, we have a big asset manager called Allianz Global Investors. Your total assets as a company is over 1 trillion. They're talking about at the COP 1.3 trillion every year for developing countries. That's how big the asset base of insurers are. So the way investment is deployed by insurance companies, whether it's supporting a climate resilient infrastructure, clean technology, will have a telling impact. So if you combine the risk manager, the risk carrier, and the investor role, this for me shows a big challenge for the industry, but also a massive opportunity to make that transition happen.
Thank you very much. Eu acho que é muito importante todos nós que
I
trabalhamos
think
no
it's
mercado.
very important for all of us who work on the market and those who are watching this lecture to see how important the insurance market is to be able to bring these improvements in the risk management. So financing the new technologies. I would like now to look at a last question to Gabriele. Looking at the future, how do you see the insurance sector in 10, 20 years? I know it's hard, but it's hard to forecast, but how do you see it in 10, 20 years?
So interestingly, this morning, my brother sent me a video of the town that we grew up 30 years ago. And I was looking at the video and I was thinking how much has changed in those 30 years. Like the way the cars look. No one had mobile phones. The way that you shopped, you went to a shopping center. There's lots of things. And if you think 30 years ago, how much has changed between that point and today? And now when I think in 30 years' time, how much is going to change? So we talk about resilience and we talk about the challenges. We talk about the impact that AI and data is going to have on the organization. But I'm positive that the changes that we're facing can be addressed and that in 30 years' time, it will be different, but we'll be able to have addressed the challenges that we're facing now. For me, I think what is important is the way that we use data. So now we can use data faster than we ever have before. So how do we do that for good? How do we use all of the information, the huge amount of information we have within all of our organizations to develop something good? And I think that's where the future is. So in 30 years' time, it's not necessary that insurance is going to be traditional like it is today. We need to innovate to adapt for the adjusting world. We need to understand how to leverage this huge capacity we have of data and develop products that meet the needs of the changing world. And maybe that means automatic insurance rather than somebody signing up for a policy or signing up for something, sitting down, going through a huge checklist. How can we automate insurance so it's where it should be when it's needed?
Muito obrigado. Eu acho que com as palavras de Gabriel vamos fechar essa conversa.
Thank you
Acho
very
que
much. I believe that with
tanto
Gabriel's
como
words, we
Mauricio
will
como
close the
Gabriel
sessions
nos dieron
with Mauricio and
una
Butch. We had
boa expectativa de cuánto no
several
como
good
industria
expectations
podemos
for
contribuir
us as an
a
industry
no
and how we
una
can
transformación,
contribute
minorar os
in order
impactos
to
a
improve
cambios climáticos
the
que
climate changes impact, which are
factor
already
para
a
nosotros.
real factor
Muito
of
obrigado a
our
todos.
daily life. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists and to Allianz for the construction of these two excellent panels that we've had in this morning. I want to remind you that at the end of the day, we will have a cocktail offered by Allianz and our partners. You will all be very welcome. So I now will give special thanks to all the ones who are empowering Casa dos Seguros, Allianz, AXA, BB Seguros, Bradesco, Caixa Seguridade, Mafre, Marsh McLennan, Porto, Prudential, and Tokyo Marine. Now, we will have a break for lunch, and at 2:30, we will be back with our program. I wish you all a good lunch.